Good morning, good morning, good morning. Y'all bear with me 1 second. I'm attempting to share my screen. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I am attempting to share my screen. Y'all give me just 1 second so we can go ahead and get started. But in the interim, while we're waiting like a minute or two, start to think of all your questions that you have for the homeless population or how the church can impact the homeless population. So that way, towards the question and answer part, we'll be able to rock and roll at that time. So just give me about a minute, everybody.
Hello, Dr. Xellex.
Hey.
What's happening?
Oh, nothing major. Trying to make sure my dog don't start barking. So it doesn't give me my option.
So click on the computer screen that's crossed out at the bottom.
Yeah, I clicked. I was scared. I didn't want it to share everything on my screen. So I was like, is this supposed to be the right one? So hit allow.
Yes, so hit allow, and then you will choose the. So are you on Chrome?
Ah, okay. You're right. You're right. You're right. You're right. I'll switch. So you stay here. I'll be right back.
Hello, everyone. Dr. Xellex will get started in just a moment. And if you guys are interested in homelessness, then this is definitely the person that you want to talk to. She also contributed a chapter in our Ministry That Impacts book, shameless plug, about some practical resources that you all can use if your church wants to do impact ministry around homelessness. I was giving you a plug for your chapter in the book.
Thank you so much. It was already in my presentation, but you're awesome.
Yes, there you go.
All right, perfect. Good morning, everybody. Again, thank you for joining me. So the way this works, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to share my screen. I'm not going to be able to see all the comments at the same time, but please definitely put the comments in. I do prefer interactive, even though we're in a virtual setting. My other disclaimer, today I am working from home, so you might hear like ruffling and scuffling. That is my lovely dog that decides that he wants to be in all things virtual. So let's go ahead and get started. So today's topic is put on pause, COVID-19 and homelessness. So just to give you some background about me, I've been a human service practitioner for 10 plus years, believe it or not, because I look a whopping 28. Been a human service professional for 10 plus years. I've worked in both family and single adult shelters. I've also worked in long-term drug rehabilitation centers. For education purposes, I have 3 master's degrees. One is in counseling, one is in mental health counseling, one is in philosophy, human services. And then last but hopefully not least, my PhD is in social policy analyst and plan, which is a lot of great words to basically say that I am hopefully a better nonprofit administrator and human service worker. So that's me, right? So I gave you the background about me, and most of my experience has been in long-term rehabilitation or drug abuse or homelessness. So let's try to get started here, right? So the topics that we're going to cover today, I'm going to give you a brief introduction. Done that already. We're also going to define homelessness, and then I'm going to give you how COVID-19 impacted the homeless population. I'm going to identify who homeless persons are, common reasons for homelessness, facts about homelessness, how to engage the homelessness, and what we can do next as far as ministry and resources. So first of all, let's start with how we define homelessness. So HUD and the federal government typically defines homelessness as an individual or family who lacks a fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence, which includes a primary nighttime resident of a place not designated to be used for regular sleeping, such as a car park, tent cities, abandoned buildings, buses, train stations, airports, camping grounds, wherever you're technically not supposed to live and it is not a fixed primary residence, you are deemed to be homeless. Second part of that is to have a publicly or privately operated shelter or transitional housing, supportive housing, drop-in centers, including hotels, motels paid by the government or charitable organizations. And depending on where you get the definition from, if your name is not actually on a lease or a deed or a mortgage, they do technically qualify that as being homeless. However, they don't define it in the normal definitions of homeless because, your child or your daughter can't possibly be on the lease right now. So therefore, they're not technically homeless. So there are different categories of homelessness. There are temporary, episodic, and chronic. So temporary means it's a temporary situation and it's usually 90 days or less, no more than 6 months, right? So you're displaced from your home. It could be a disaster. It could be eviction, floods, fires, things of that nature. Episodically homeless means that people go in and out of the homeless, go in and out of experiencing homelessness. So, they have a spat where they're living independently, then they might end up in shelter temporarily. They'll get some resources, go back out independently, come back into shelter and be going in and out. So they have multiple episodes of being homeless. Then you have a person that is chronically homeless, which is a person who stays in a dwelling a year or more without any appearance of homelessness. So in order to be deemed chronically homeless, you have to have been living on the street, maybe couch surfing, just doing kind of drop-in centers, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, over a period of a year with no stable housing. That then defines you to be chronically homeless. The other thing that defines you to be chronically homeless, which is parallel to this, is if you reside in a shelter for 1 year or more, you are then deemed to be chronically homeless. So we have unsheltered, sheltered, and transitional housing. So unsheltered are all of the persons that are commonly portrayed in media. Okay, so they typically, whenever you hear about, we're combating homelessness, They're talking about the unsheltered homeless population for the most part. Those are the persons that are under the bridges. They live in their cars. They're on the street. They're in the woods. They're in tents. Those are the panhandlers that you probably might see from time to time. That's the unsheltered. Then you have the sheltered population. Those are the persons who decided to go into either a municipal shelter or they're living in an abandoned building, which makes them a squatter. And depending on your state, there are squatter rights or there are no squatter rights. Then you have those who are in more institutionalized housing, which is jails, drug, alcohol, treatment programs, hospitals, respite, motels, hotels. So those are the three different types of ways you can be homeless. So you have street homeless, you have abandoned building or shelter, and then you have institutionalized homeless populations. So everybody knows that COVID hit us, and when it hit very hard. For those of us who have someplace to live, it hit us, but we had someplace to live. So when the government, whatever your local government is, when they said shelter in place, stay in your house, don't go outside. If you weren't an essential worker, you did not really have to go outside or go to work. You now transition to working from home. However, the homeless population was hit because for a few different reasons. One main reason is if a person is living inside of a shelter building, most shelters are in dorm style, which means that it's an open room or open floor plan, that there is just like a bed, there's a cot, or there's a locker. And that means, I need you to just visualize this, that let's say it's a very large facility, there could be 100 people laying less than 6 feet next to each other. Therefore, their option to self-quarantine or maintain personal health was very limited. Healthcare options were also limited. For the unsheltered, we know that COVID kind of took the forefront to everybody's healthcare needs. So if it wasn't COVID related, a lot of hospitals were delaying their process in seeing you. A lot of people in shelter, if they don't have an open public assistance case or Medicare or Medicaid, do not have healthcare options either way. Food options became limited. Depending on what state you're in, it depends on what kind of resources they have. But for example, here in New York, our single shelters do provide 3 meals, plus they have food stamps, right? Which is not so limited if the person decides to go into the shelter and eat the food options. However, on the family side, they had to go to grocery stores because most family shelters do not provide food options as far as cooked food, but they are allowed to cook themselves. So then it became an option of, we know the grocery store was sold out. We know that toilet paper went crazy. So a lot of places were buying these things by the bulk in the shelter system. And they were prioritized because shelter is considered essential work. So therefore, there's a lot of trauma on both ends for the worker as well as the shelter resident or the street homeless person. So as a human service worker, I was actually prepared to live in the shelter in case, the shutdown was more extreme and, they wasn't allowing us to drive. So you have to be mindful of how that impacts the worker's family and how that impacts the homeless person's family. So there was an increase of about 40% across outreach among homeless adults. So we all know that states and cities had to rapidly respond to the stay-at-home orders by their governor. However, those who didn't have homes were in a real critical situation. COVID-19 is a public health concern. Homelessness is already a public health concern. So I need you to think about matching the homeless public health concern with the pandemic public health concern. And now you have both of them. Some cities decided to transition a lot of the street homeless persons into hotels. A lot of hotels weren't getting a lot of traffic at that time. So they was utilizing hotels to house these persons. Now that we are a little bit post-COVID, they are now, I don't want to call it evicting, but they are now evicting those persons out of those hotels because now hotels want to go back into business, which is now going to increase some more street homelessness across the board. So let's talk about a couple of different things with COVID-19 and the homeless population. Number one, the service delivery had to change. So if you are in shelter, or if the person was in shelter, you usually would go see your caseworker. You physically had to see them. There was always the building of rapport and things of that nature. Everybody had to shift very rapidly. Everything had to go from being remote or having a virtual setting. I want to be very thankful for all of the video options. You know, if this would have happened 10 years ago when I started, this would have been a complete mess. But because of now phone and video options, it actually made service delivery a little easier. So it was an easy transition for people to outreach those persons. However, if that person did not have a smart device or a device at all, it then creates a new level of worry, because how are you going to outreach that person? The trauma impact. Again, remember I said to you guys that COVID-19 impacted not just, you know, the regular working adult, but also impacted the homeless population. But homeless people were faced with increased trauma. With the world being closed and limited resources for street homeless, people went hungry or utilized other means of survival. The irony of that is that when COVID hit, everybody in the world became more understanding and more empathetic. So while it was very limited, there were a lot of restaurants that went into donating to homeless shelters. There were a lot of grocery stores that were able to give to families or people on the street. So it was an equal balance there. Now, the shelter in place order was a culture shock for everybody. Now, I don't know about, I'm not a parent, but I do have a dog. And to conduct a meeting with a barking dog is already a bit complex. So I can only imagine, you know, parents with their children having to create new boundaries in their household, turning bedrooms into offices, turning kitchen tables and dining room tables into, you know, workspace. So now let's imagine that for homeless people. For those living in shelters, some of them don't, again, dormitory style. So they don't have the option to create these boundaries. There are some shelters that only have the size of maybe one of your rooms or maybe a closet that their whole family is living in, and therefore there are no boundaries. So then it goes into, how do you do remote learning with your children while attempting to still work? You have one computer device in that family household. Let's talk about the families that the mother does not even have a high school diploma or GED, and now she's trying to navigate this new math that they're doing in some areas. How does that work for the parent dynamic, or with the parent and the child? So there's a lot of tension that was happening. There was a lot of culture shocks. There was a lot of attempting to balance out how that would work for the students. Then with the street outreach had to decrease due to the pandemic. Again, everybody was concerned about their own personal health. So, you know, the likelihood that you're going to go out and help the homeless became very limited. However, there were some agencies that, as the CDC pushed out safety precautions, they used those safety precautions to make sure that people still had meals. Now they are still constantly working on trying to get the vaccine to the homeless population and trying to get resources for street homeless individuals. So you're probably asking yourself, why are people homeless? Now, I'm no theologian, but there were homeless people in the Bible, and it just keeps going. Homelessness causes a real complex. A lot of times you typically want to think that, you know, homelessness is caused by just the personal factors that are there on the bottom. Like, oh, okay, they're all addicted, they're all mentally ill, and that's it. However, there's a lot of factors that contribute to somebody's homelessness. One being structural factors, right? Lack of affordable housing, unemployment, poverty, inadequate mental health services, limited resources, bad money management, not being able to budget, never living independently, and now you have 3 kids. Those kind of things we have to be mindful of. Personal factors, addiction, mental health, family breakdown. Also causes are natural causes, floods, fires, slumlords, right? Why would you want to stay in a building infested with rats? If you and your family don't have to, you'll seek other services. So you have to be mindful that everybody's reason for experiencing homelessness is not just, oh, they must have mental health concerns. Oh, they must have been in jail and didn't have any options. You know, because believe it or not, a large population of veterans that go serve this country come back into this country and don't have housing options. And they become homeless or chronically homeless because they come back after fighting for us and then they have nowhere to live. And then the resources for them are also very limited, whether they're dishonorably discharged or honorably discharged. So there's a lot of different reasons for why people end up homeless. In addition to that, homelessness is one thing, but housing instability or insecurity is another thing. Sometimes, you know, your house didn't close in enough time and you didn't have any other place to live. You ended up staying in a hotel or a motel. That's housing instability. Yes, you're waiting for an option, but in that temporary stint of time, you are in fact homeless. So we have to be mindful of those things when engaging. So here are some other common reasons for homelessness: domestic violence. So violence and aggressive behavior within the home, typically involving the violent abuse of a spouse, family member, partner, or sibling. I forgot to add that part. Again, we typically think that domestic violence is just man versus woman. But believe it or not, there are women batterers. There are domestic violence situations between siblings that cause you not to feel safe in the house that you're residing in. Therefore, you end up homeless. We have eviction, the action of expelling somebody, especially a tenant, from a property. So basically, you didn't pay your rent, or they do something illegal and they try to evict you. There are illegal evictions. There are legal evictions. Loss of job or income, unemployment, unable to secure new or stable employment options. The other thing is, usually the minimum wage, whatever city or state that you're in, does not match the cost of living in that city or state. Lack of affordable housing. That's across the United States. Again, your income does not match affordable housing. If it's anything like New York City, the affordable housing options that they put up in some of the areas, the minimum income is $100K. And it just blows my mind that at $100K, you really think that needed to be an affordable housing option. Hazardous housing conditions. I just talked about slumlords, construction, fear of threats, inadequate heating. You know, you don't have to stay in that apartment. You should be able, or you have the right to safe and affordable housing. Overcrowded housing, right? So let's say you're living with somebody, your mother, or whatever, your father, and he got 2 kids, and then you got 4 kids. It's 10 of y'all in that apartment. It's not going to work out. So therefore, you end up being homeless. Natural disasters, hurricane, blizzards, storms, fires can cause damage to your house. Therefore, you might end up homeless. Criminal record, drug abuse, a list of persons who have previous criminal convictions, habitual taking addictive or illegal drugs. However, those are also, even though that's the main factor, it is a trickle-down effect. Obviously, some landlords are not open to renting to those persons who have felonies or misdemeanors. And then for the drug abuse part, if you have a drug addiction, more than likely you're spending more money on drugs than you are adequate housing and maintaining stability. So what may happen later? So we know right now that the federal government has given a lot of resources. Like, raise your hand if you got a stimulus check. So basically what they're doing is, the federal government is trying to make sure that people can maintain in the middle of a crisis. And we applaud them and we appreciate them. However, if you want to look to the future, and let's be very real and honest with what's happening, right? A lot of quality time or the stay-at-home order can lead to other things. I put the little wink, wink in there. Y'all can insert whatever wink, wink you want to put. However, a lot of quality time, whether, now you're working from home, now you're dating, you have more time to date because you're working from home, whatever it is, it can possibly lead to more children. It also leads to things like a lot of people realize in their relationship that we weren't really meant to be together, because you really shouldn't be with somebody 24 hours a day. There might be an increase of divorces, increase of family separations, increase of eviction rates. So unemployment, I do believe, was extended to August 31st. I'm not too sure a lot of people were saving their money or not. However, if, they was in a forbearance and not have to pay their rent, let's say for 6 months, hopefully they were saving that, because the landlord will more than likely be looking for their money once the forbearance is lifted. the limited resources, and like I said, the misuse of pandemic funding. So if you use your stimulus for these expensive flights that we have right now, and you didn't pay your rent, the likelihood of eviction is a little higher. Currently, as of April 2021, and we know our stats are usually a month or two behind, there are over 500,000 people homeless in the United States. Usually this number is counting street and sheltered homelessness. They are not necessarily counting those who are in institutions or in prisons or drug rehabilitations. So earlier today, I talked about what does homelessness look like. So I want you to drop in the chat if you feel comfortable doing so, because a lot of people is like, don't judge me. Drop in the chat what comes to mind when you think of a homeless person or family. Let me make my screen smaller so I can see if there's any comments. Okay. So usually when you think about homelessness, you think about the top image, right? You think about the stereotype that the majority of the homeless population looks like that. Everybody's street homeless, everybody's mentally ill, everybody's in the way. But in all actuality, about 80% of the homeless population looks like the brother on the bottom. They look exactly like me and you, and all they do is sleep in the shelter. They still get up, they go to work, and they find other means to survive. You also assume the following. So these are some common things that people assume. For example, if they would just get a job, they'd be okay. Homeless people are lazy. They're just trying to beat the system. Oh, they smell and all they do is use drugs. Now, yes, there's a percentage of people who this is the case. This is in fact the case, but this is not the majority of the persons that are homeless. So now what? What can I do? So I put this quote in because I use it a lot whenever I do presentations to get people to understand that homelessness is an experience. It's not a disease. We try to treat it as if, or we try to approach it. Let me not say treat, because treat sounds like disease. We try to approach homelessness or homeless ministry as if the person is, they got leprosy or something, and they're just, oh my God, don't touch them, don't talk to them, they must be the bottom of the barrel. But that's not even the case, right? A hardship happened, and then a hardship after a hardship happened. That's it. It's an experience, and sometimes the hole gets so black that you don't even know how to get out of it. You feel ashamed to even share it with persons, and you try as best as you can to survive. Right? So we have to look at it as an experience. Very similar to the domestic violence population. It's an experience. They're not victims for the rest of their life. Okay? So we have to be mindful of that, to treat it as an experience and try to help somebody overcome their experience, not as a disease. So one of the things I created this wonderful acronym called Creating a Safe Church. And the reason for that is I did explain to y'all before, my background is in counseling and mental health counseling. And one of the things we have to be mindful of is that the church used to be a safe space. And what do we say was safe space? For any clinicians or therapists on the line, you understand that safe space means that I can tell you anything, I can share anything, and I'm not being judged. I'm actually being helped, and we're going through a process of healing. That used to be what the church was. It used to be a place of refuge. It used to be a place where, I can say anything, I can do anything. And then wherever I needed guidance, I was receiving it from the persons in the church. Not happening at 100% today. So when we think about creating a safe church, we should think about a church that's secure, which means, honestly, I think the church should follow the same confidentiality standards that most human service practitioners have to follow. I think they need to follow the same HIPAA guidelines. I think they should be held to the same standards as most essential workers if they want to deem themselves as essential. Be approachable. I always talk about this, and I always come for the usher board if they still exist. but you got to smile at people, right? You have to work on building rapport. You have to understand that being a mentor requires you to be intentional and mindful. Nobody has to just come to you because you're holy and saved. You understand? Like, you have to still smile, be engaging. And I should want to talk to you and feel secure in doing so. On the other side of that, everybody has done something that they are ashamed of. And if you didn't, well, slide in the chat or email me, because you're as close to Jesus as possible. But we got to be forgiven. You did not do everything perfect. I did not do everything perfect. So when I say something, don't make it seem like my sins are so much greater than your sins. So we have to be forgiving in the church, right? The world is hard as it is, but it's amazing to me that over the course, and I've been in the church my whole life, baptized, raised in it. Now I'm a preacher's kid, preacher's grandkid. It's amazing how, there was a point in time when you can go and talk to somebody in the church that wasn't your grandmother, and they would embrace you, or you had a connection with them. But now you can't share anything because it might get to a whole nother state by the time that happens and somebody's judging you. Also, be encouraging. Ministry is about encouraging the person so that they encourage other people. In order to build disciples, you have to be secure, approachable, forgiving, and encouraging. The only way that somebody's going to go out and get somebody else or motivate somebody else's soul for Christ is if they have all of these tools when they do enter your church. We have to get out of the mindset of thinking that the church is a business, understanding that there are business components to the church, but that's not how that should not be at the forefront of how we do things, right? So in a therapeutic model or in the shelter model, right now I have over 1,000 clients over 9 shelters, 1,000 plus clients in 9 shelters. If I can move out one person, I feel like I'm doing all right. So we should have that same mindset when we're in church and in ministry. If I can get one soul to Christ, then that's perfectly okay with me. The other thing about it is, and I might ruffle some feathers with this one, however, the church is supposed to be an equal opportunity location, right? So therefore, we should be diverse. We should be inclusive. We should be accepting, welcoming, creating a safe space for everybody. Now, a lot of people like to use that word inclusive as if, okay, I'll just include, the 3 people that I might know. No. Inclusivity is across the board. Whoever comes into your ministry who wants to help, you do not have to agree with their lifestyle, their decisions, or their mindset, right? Which is what ministry is, right? Mentoring is where 2 people that should have nothing in common come together for the goodness of God. It's not for the goodness of how you feel about the person. It's about what people can offer to the kingdom. So we have to be mindful of that, right? You don't want to push people out. You don't want to say, oh, well, don't talk to them. Like as if, again, their lifestyle, their decisions, or their sins are all of a sudden going to rub off on you. So you have to be mindful of that, creating this welcoming, safe space. So I already said some of these, but let's go through a couple of them. One of them is just stop judging. Oh my God. Stop judging. Okay. Everybody makes mistakes. You made mistakes. Listen, I can call out a couple mothers that made mistakes, right? Stop judging, right? Create a space that is safe, that is not judgmental, and where people can grow and manifest in that purpose. Think of it almost like planting, right? If you planted a seed in the ground and the soil is not doing well, I've never heard a planter judge the soil ever in my life. Like I've never heard that. I've never heard somebody be like, wow, this dirt is really dirty. Never, right? You know what they do? They find new strategies to help the dirt in order for the seed to grow. And that's how the church should think of it, right? So if we're the dirt when seeds come in, right? What do we need in our soil or in our dirt to make the seed grow? Community outreach. Be intentional in the ministry that impacts your community. You know the needs of your community. If you don't, every community pretty sure has a community board liaison or community board or local legislation or a local council person. Reach out to those persons and find out where you can be of help. Get to know, understand along the way, be kind, loving, and be Christians. So that's the part about building rapport, right? Get to know, understand that you don't know everything, right? And the culture has shifted. These generations accept other things that other generations did not accept. You need to understand it and meet people in the middle, right? That is how you build disciples. Educate the congregation. Please understand that we are all a paycheck away, a paycheck or a disaster away from being homeless. So you are not better than them, right? You can make, I've known doctors, I've known people with PhDs and masters that were in homeless shelters because something happened, domestic violence, disaster, fire, whatever it was. So to be a place of education in that congregation. Become the solution. So think outside the box. Anything's possible. Listen, it's 2021. YouTube is the guru of all things. Find out what you need to know and develop the outreach program. And I'm gonna give you some tools on how to do that on a lower scale. If your church, depending on low scale or higher scale. Forgive the dog. Become the outreach. Again, develop things or programs or projects that can help the homeless population. So for example, an eviction outreach project, housing workshops, promote home ownership. One thing we don't do in the Black community is promote home ownership or investments. We need to start thinking about generational wealth, and we might want to use the church as a location to educate the persons. The church should create a bigger impact. And the main thing is to become trauma informed. Understand that we all have experienced trauma. If you think that you have overcome your trauma in some way, form, or fashion, you have to notice where it spikes from time to time. If you go online, you can look up something called adverse childhood experiences. And in that box, it tells you a level of where your trauma is and how it impacts current situations. So here are some ministry ideas and resources. Everybody who knows me knows that I like to give practical things that people can do. But before I do that, I want to put this little plug in. So please go out and buy the book. It is still on Amazon. And the reason why I want to promote this book is out of the 27 plus chapters, everybody is giving you insight on how to promote or grow your ministry, whether it's financial wellness, whether it's overall wellness, whether it's homeless ministry, whether it's digital ministry, whether it's building disciples. I definitely think that this book is a resource that every church needs, no matter what your denomination is. But definitely check this out. In my chapter, we go over a couple of things that I'm about to talk about now. However, I did not give it all away, so you still want to go ahead and buy the book. So the first way to do it is, grant writing and outsourcing. Grant writing is a big one. Y'all forgive this dog. Please forgive him. I guess the mailman's outside. Grant writing and outsourcing. Right now, there's so much money circulating, and there's always grant money. Even before the pandemic, there's grant writing. You can outsource a grant writer that doesn't cost the church any money. You know why? Because the grant writer adds their funding to the grants. So for example, let's say you want to start the soup kitchen in your church. However, y'all don't have the means, or the offering is not, high enough to really be doing food every week, throughout the year. If you write a grant, the grant writer puts whatever their fee is in there. So let's say they're charging you $500 to write the grant, and you need $10,000 to do the soup kitchen. They'll write it for $10,500 so that they get their portion of the grant, and that is completely legal. Be a place of educational resources. A lot of our churches should, if you have space, think of stuff outside of just going to church. If a lot of your parishioners need GED, job readiness training, resume writing, mock interviews, I'm pretty sure you have a ton of professionals in your church that can help with this ministry. You can, depending on where you're located, you can become a site for GED programs or for GED schooling or testing if you have the space. Medicaid, Medicare, liaison, healthcare advocacy. A lot of our people aren't prepared to retire. We've always been workers. We've just never been prepared to retire. And if we did, we might have had bad money management, right? We wanted the glitz and the glamour. We wanted more than whatever our parents, gave to us. And that's okay. I don't want you to think I'm not judging you. However, the church, a lot of times, especially with the homeless population, they don't have an address. they can't get Medicaid or Medicare benefits, and they can't go into healthcare offices, or they don't know where to start. The church can provide these educational workshops where, one, the church can provide an address for these persons. So you can either create mailboxes using the current address that you have, or you can Google virtual mailboxes where people get actual addresses so that they are equipped to get Medicaid or Medicare benefits through your local or federal government. Again, churches that have locations, being that we are acknowledging that drug use is pertinent in the homeless population, you might want to be a location for Narcotics Anonymous or Alcohols Anonymous, and that is by creating a safe space. Honestly, all you have to do is connect with Narcotics Anonymous and just provide the spacing. That's it. And you'll be amazed that if you start to get the people that come into the church, they might start reading the bulletin board. They might bump into the pastor. They might bump into somebody and then start coming to your church. So you have to be mindful of engagement. Food pantry and soup kitchen ties back into my grants. However, food access and resources and groceries is really big across the board. I don't know about y'all, but groceries are expensive, or maybe they're just expensive in New York City. I don't know, but I know like a tub of butter is like $7 and bacon is like $10. So, you know, if they only get food stamps at a monthly rate of $200, that's really not going to stretch. Because as a single woman, when I go to the grocery store, I try to buy, I try to go in there with a budget number, because if I go in there and really just get all the things that I want, I know it's at least $300-400, which is absurd. So be a place of refuge as it relates to food access and resources. So even if you can't do the food pantry or the soup kitchen, you can create a resource guide at your church where people can go in the binder and probably find where the local pantries are and go to that, which is what most shelters do. Shelters do have minimal food pantry supplies on site. Most of them focus on making sure that babies can get stuff like baby formula and things of that nature. But they do have a resource guide where they can, a client can get a copy of it and they can go ahead and find the closest food pantry. So this is just a nice quote I really like. To a homeless person, home is literally where the heart is. And believe it or not, I tell people all the time, I'd rather be around 100 homeless people than 100 church folks. I say it all the time. And it might be because I've been in this profession for so long, but the engagement, the interactions, and the genuineness that happens between the unchurched is way more promising than the church. You have to be mindful that people know about God. You are not schooling people about God, okay? What you need to be doing is getting them to understand other facets of it, getting them to understand their walk in their spirituality. That's how you build disciples. If you think that you're teaching them about God, they know God. And when you interact with a lot of people who are in struggle, who are in trauma, they actually have strong prayer lives. They actually have strong belief in God. Again, they are experiencing something that is creating a hardship. Any questions? I did that in 42 minutes, y'all. Let me come back to y'all. Hey, sis. Let me stop sharing my screen. So any questions? Let me read this chat really fast, but I want to answer any questions that we have. I have tons of ideas for homeless ministries, because we typically don't look at them as a population that we even want to talk to. Again, because the stereotype is that they're dirty, they smell, they steal, they just use drugs, but they don't. Like a majority of them don't. I have friends who have experienced homeless instability. I did not judge them at any point in time, right? Because they were experiencing something that was a hardship. And again, you can't look at it like, wow, did she lose her job, or did he lose his job, or maybe he's on drugs? No, maybe there was a massive flood that happened in his apartment and now he's homeless. It's really that simple. Have you seen an increase of homeless children over the years? Yes. So I'll give you some stats in New York City in particular, right? There are about 15,000 families that are homeless in New York City, which is over 1 million children. Isn't that amazing? Like, and the reason why it also makes you really passionate, and that's just in New York City, right? I don't really know the stats about United States, but in New York City by itself, when the pandemic hit, there was 1 million students that were no longer in schools, which means they weren't getting lunch, which is where most of our schools provide, lunch and breakfast. So now we had to find out, how is we going to feed these kids 3 times a day? How is we going to school them? And did they have the resources to do so? In addition to that, everybody is not a digital learner, right? So what do I mean by that? And sis, I'm sure you can understand what I'm saying. Some people need interactions. I was on yesterday with one of the presenters for the Rethink conference, and she said that boys need motion. I didn't even know that. So she helped me a lot. So I guess when I have kids, I'm like, stand up, do your homework, run, move around. I don't know. But we have to be mindful of these things. These people were locked in their units or locked in a shelter the same way we were. And you have 1 million children that did not have enough stimulation. And you're trying to teach them new math on Zoom, and they're just looking at the screen, right? Because they just need the attendance at this point. Like, everybody probably passed their grades because we just need to get attendance and say that you was in school. But can they count? Can they read? You know what I mean? They need that type of engagement, especially when we talk about brain development, right? The brain develops the most in the first 6 years. And then after the 6 years, it starts to slow down, and then it stops around 25. So you're talking about kindergarten and elementary school kids that are now on a computer, right, trying to learn school. And I'm talking about 1 million kids just in New York City by itself, let alone how it impacted the country. In Atlanta, most of the shelter centers agencies are connected with churches. What strategies would you suggest for building partnerships? Atlanta is a unique area, right? I know a fun fact about Atlanta is that most of the workers in shelter systems have to have like a master's degree or above, which is amazing to me, even for like case managers. So I know that there's a lot of turnover in Atlanta as it relates to human service workers in general. However, building partnerships, I think one of the things is that, so Atlanta, there are only 3 right to shelter cities in the country, right? Atlanta is not one of them. It's New York City, Boston, Massachusetts, and Los Angeles. What does that mean, Xellex? That means that those 3 cities have a lot of funding towards housing and housing options, as well as getting shelter. Every other city in the United States is following their own guidelines of how they want to deal with shelter. So depending on how it is in Atlanta, I'm pretty sure it's more of a short stay, or it's more of like they have to have a pre-existing condition to be in shelter. So depending on whatever area you're in, you should find out what the foundation is based off of, and then see how the church can partner with them. For example, if the shelter, if they only take, let's say they only take persons who have serious mental illness or drug addiction. So then you would partner with them, probably with NA and AA. You would partner with them with doing educational workshops. You can partner with them with Medicaid and Medicare assistance, or to be a hub, or you can partner with them with food securities. You can also, a lot of shelters in the country make the person leave the shelter during the daytime. You can't just go sit around the shelter forever, okay? So you might want to create, so we call it up here economic empowerment programs. So if the church can develop like economic empowerment programs where people can leave the shelter and maybe from 12 to 4 come into the church and have job readiness programs, or the church can also partner with other either non-for-profits or privately owned agencies. And if you're doing, let's say, a job readiness program, if there's a school locally that is teaching medical assistance and let's say CNA, the church is the liaison between, the homeless population and getting more students, because there's an economic empowerment program at the church. If that makes sense, Amina. So here, men are allowed in shelters if they're married, right? You have to have a domestic partnership or be married, or you have to be the father of that child in order to come into family shelter. That's here in New York City, and that's probably Los Angeles and Boston as well. But again, it is really discouraging for that dynamic. But depending on that agency or the agencies across the board, their funding is governing how their shelter is ran. So if they're running by grants or if they're running by like federal funding or whatever, like if their mission statement is only geared for women and children, that's why they're probably limiting that men can't come into the shelter. Here in New York City, we have families with children shelters, we have single adult shelters, and then we have adult family shelters, which basically means for the families with children, you have to be under 18 or have at least one child in the family under 18. You go to a different set of shelters. If everybody in your family is over 18, you go to a different set of shelters. And then single adults have shelters. Then we have veteran shelters. But see, that goes back into how the church can be a buffer, right? So let's say you're saying in Virginia, that's how it happens, right? So let's say the church can then be innovative where they're doing more family reunification workshops to try to be the buffer between, okay, you're in the shelter, so you have to go to single shelter and then you have to go to, let's say, the family dynamic. So now the church can be the place of family reunification where they can have, it sounds really institutionalized, but the visits between the families can happen there safely without having to pay for dates. You can do cute things like date nights for homeless families, right? And again, this is all just, I'm doing this off the cuff, but it'd be really helpful, right? Childcare for families with children, have child night on the weekends to be like, okay, Friday and Saturday, the church hosts childcare. I know a lot of times we like to call it vacation Bible school, right, sis? But we ain't got to call it that. We can call it something else and allow the parents to go out on a date, right? Because that will strengthen the family dynamic. In addition to that, people remember who support them, okay? So even though they might not be a member of your church, you took care of their kids, right? And when Bobby comes back home and he's like, Mommy, I had fun time with Sister Marks, Mom might actually, be like, you know what? Let me go talk to Sister Marks. You get what I'm saying? Like, and now you have a member. Now you're going in a different direction. But that's a ministry idea where, yes, parents' night out, where you have a ministry idea like, they get to go out because it strengthens their family dynamic. But again, family reunification day or family reunification night. If you have the land, have cookouts, only invite homeless people. Again, sounds crazy, but these are things that these people are not experiencing that we take for granted, right? Like currently right now, I'm setting up family portrait day in the shelters that I oversee. You know why? Because they don't have photographers, because I got tons of them. They don't have photographers and they'll never have a family portrait. Okay, I don't even know if JCPenney's and all those stores even still do family portraits, but they don't have the money for that, right? And that is something that they're not going to get outside, that even though they're in shelter, they're still a family. And then when they leave, they have a picture of their family, right? Because we take those small things for granted. But think about stuff like that. Haircuts. Connect with barbers around your shelter. Around your church. Barbers, hair salons. If you could pay for it, pay for it. If you can't, ask them to do it for free. Give them a tax write-off. They get tax write-off. So give it to them and do it that way. Start to think of all of the simple things that we take for granted. And that's why I always tell people to think outside the box. We like to be like, oh, okay, we're just going to have a food pantry and we're going to have a soup kitchen. And then at the soup kitchen, it'd be the workers over here behind the table and it'd be the homeless people and nobody talks to each other. Then we're defeating the purpose, right? So think of other things. Family portrait day, barbershops, hair salons, helping them buy their clothes. We like to do also book bag giveaways. If your neighborhood doesn't do them, that's fine. We have tons of book bags up here. So book bag giveaways. Believe it or not, a lot of people can't buy a book bag. They cannot buy a book bag. And they cannot buy the list of supplies that come from these teachers, no offense to any teachers in the room, I know that y'all funding is limited, but it'd be like, bring the whole classroom. Every student got to bring their own classroom, right? Try to be helpful there. Yeah, I have tons of ideas. I could keep going, but start to think of things outside of the box, but literally look. If you Google whatever the resources are in your neighborhood, one of those websites are going to tell you what is lacking. Like, you're going to find what is lacking in that area, and you're going to find out why that is. And then you can either try to advocate if you're really passionate about that in the area, or be the church that these parents need. But the most hit population, we got 6 minutes, y'all. The most hit population are single adults. Families are hit a lot too, but families typically have a little bit more resources than single adults. But in particular, single adult men. And that is why that population is mostly projected on movies and TVs and things like that, because there's so many of them. And let me explain why. If I was to become homeless tomorrow, my family would take me in. Why? Because I'm a female, I'm by myself, and they're like, oh, she can't do it on her own. But if one of my older brothers, let's say, ended up in a hardship, let's say, using drugs or whatever, the family be like, nope, he's a man, he got to figure it out. And he would end up homeless. So that's one reason why a lot of them end up homeless. Another reason is they don't want to be homeless, but they choose to try to seek their own independence by using other avenues. This is why you have to talk to them and engage them to figure out where they're at. I've met hundreds of clients who said, yeah, I can go stay with my father. I don't want to. Because they just don't want to. So they will sit in the shelter, try to utilize the resources of the system to get out. So don't assume that everybody is the same. And every time you engage somebody in need, they tell you, either reading through the lines or sometimes directly, they tell you exactly what they need. Children do as well. So the more you talk to children, children will tell you what they need. And then if it don't work out, then you can meet them in the middle. Same thing happens with adults, right? If they tell you something like, well, I've been eating oodles and noodles for 3 days, you might want to ask, is everything okay? You need something? Just ask the question. You know what I mean? Because they might just be eating oodles and noodles because they don't want to ask. They don't want to ask, or they really like oodles and noodles. So you don't want to assume and then be like, oh God, Xellex been eating oodles and noodles for 3 days. Let me just, she might be going through it. That's where the judgmental piece comes into play. And then we're not getting the disciples that we need. 3 minutes left. Any questions? Hey, y'all. Hey. Y'all know I'm real passionate about this homeless thing. So I could talk about it for days. But if not, I guess I'm supposed to give y'all a 3-minute break to the next session. Thank y'all for joining me. I love being here. This is awesome all the time. Shout out to LaKesha. That's my girl. Shout out to LaKesha. I love her ideas. I'm in all the projects. I don't care what she thinks about. I'm in all the projects. So everybody have a great and wonderful rest of your afternoon. Remember to stay with the Rethinking Conference. Remember to buy the book, read the chapter, reach out to me if you ever need ideas. If you need me to come to your church, I'm available. Everybody have a great afternoon. Peace.